Hello.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, Simon, it's Skylar. How you doing?
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey.
Hello.
Hey,
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
This is Conversations with Storytellers, a podcast of wisdom, thoughts, and folk and fairy tales from our elders, and I am your host, Simon Brooks. A meeting with professional storytellers. I decided to travel around the country when I could to interview some of the elders in the community of traditional storytelling. People who, for their work, travel about telling myths and legends, folk and fairy tales. Each storyteller shares their thoughts on our profession and gems of wisdom and, sometimes, a story or two. I'm glad you're here. If you didn't listen to part one of this interview, please go back and check it out. I ended the first part of the interview with a cliffhanger, and you'll have no idea what Joel is talking about. It's worth it. Joel Ben Izzy is a delight. He comes from out west in California. His stories, and there are quite a few, are filled with warmth and passion. In this second part of the interview, he shares even more stories and his process, if he has one. Welcome back, Joel.
And when he looked in a puddle of water, he saw his face, which was not the Solomon he knew. It was an old man. And so began the wanderings of Solomon as a beggar, a journey that would last a lifetime. So at some point in telling the beginning of that story, I got really into it, and I didn't know why. But now back to the story at hand. It was not until I found I had thyroid cancer, which I thought would make just a terrific story when I told it, because there was a needle that was this big, right? And like, why would somebody use a needle that big to test the thyroid? And it had begun with gout. It was just this odd mix of things that I thought. I said, Tali, to my wife, this is going to make the best story. Look, there's the gout, there's the needle, there's a dream about lifting a piano up, dropping on my foot because that was the gout. All these pieces. She said, Joel, this is cancer. I said, no, this will make a great story. And then when I woke up, I had that feeling just for an instant of jet lag. You know that feeling like you wake up and you think, where am I? And what the and I thought, oh, am I in Kathmandu, maybe? That'd be great. Or Budapest. Or maybe I'm in Paris. I love Paris. And then I heard the beeping of machines, and then I was, in surgery, or not, just after surgery.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And it was no adventure at all. And I said, some adventure this is. And there was that weird thing of no sound coming out of my mouth. And I tried again. I said, some adventure this is. And I thought, oh crap, I must be dreaming. Because when you're a performer, you have certain kinds of dreams. Either A, you're like on stage and forgot to get dressed, which can be kind of embarrassing. Or B, you're a storyteller, you get up and you can't speak. I thought, oh, this is one of those dreams. Like, I can't speak. And I waited for it to end. And a couple hours later, as the sun rose outside the hospital window, I said, oh, I am fully awake and I cannot speak. And at first, the doctors assured me it was temporary. He said, give it a couple weeks. And after a couple weeks later, I said, doctor, it's been 2 weeks. I still can't talk. All I had was a whisper. He said, I wouldn't worry. Give it a month. And after a month, they said, doctor, now it's been a month. I still can't talk. He said, I'd give it 2 months. And after 2 months, I said, doctor, now it's 2 months. I still can't talk. What do I do? He said, if it's 2 months, this is permanent. You won't be able to speak again. I hope this doesn't affect your work.
Oh,
and so that started me off on a journey. And so it's one of those cases, like you mentioned, of a story that's there, but until you fall into it, suddenly I got very interested in the lessons Solomon could learn only because he lost that ring. And having lost my voice, which was really, that linchpin of an identity for me, that was really how a journey begins for me.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And now you can talk again. How long were you without your voice?
1.5 years.
Wow. So you must have been petrified through some of that time.
Petrified, and I was really angry, and I was self-pitying, and I was bitter. And I was just working with a group in Mexico last week, and I sort of just started questioning. I said, because they'd all traveled to this place where it's a sort of a health and healing resort, and I said, hey, what's the difference between a schlep and a journey? And because some knew the word schlep, some didn't. Schlep is sort of like you got kids and you say, all right, at 3:00 we got to be at school, but we have to drop this off here, and then I have to run across town to take them to this lesson. Then I have to do that, and and then this is due, so this has to happen. And you have this list of 50 things, and you're schlepping from one to another. That's a schlep.
Okay.
Something turns a schlep into a journey. I'll ask you, Simon, what is it? What turns a schlep into a journey?
The way you view it, whether you look at it as a list of things to do or a list of experiences to experience.
Like you went on a college trip with your son last week, yeah?
Daughter, yeah.
You did with your daughter.
Yeah.
Was it a schlep or a journey?
It started off as a bit of a schlep, and then it turned into a journey. Yeah.
So that's how this was too. This started off as kind of a schlep because I thought my voice would come back at any minute. I thought the nerve would come back, so I kept on opening up to see, trying, talking. No, maybe now. And I had that whisper, but there's a way of actually showing up in the moment with the reality of it and saying, actually, this is the truth. This moment is all that exists. And now this
Right.
moment. I mean, there's something about mindfulness and being present when you feel like you arrive. And I found myself falling into that journey.
Yeah. And your voice came back, if I remember rightly. I got COVID back in August, and my memory is still a little dodgy at times. But if I remember rightly, was it some sort of party or bar mitzvah or something when your voice came back?
No, that was a party and a bar mitzvah where I hoped my voice would come back, and it did not.
Okay.
And you're referring to the scene in my book that led to sort of meeting up with Lenny, who you
Right.
didn't. You want to hear what that's about. But
Yeah. So is Lenny a real person for realsies, or is he?
For
some
realsies,
sort of...
because I wanted to tell you the truth. Lenny is a composite character.
Okay.
And he's put together from several different people and more. So he's a little bit, I went through this experience, and I did have a therapist who said, this is the best thing that's ever happened to you, losing your voice.
Wow.
To which I said, bullshit. And that's there. And I didn't want to write about my therapist per se as that character. And so I took a little bit of him. I took a little bit of Steve Sanfield too, with that sort of the which kind
Gruff.
of has the gruffness a little bit. I took a little bit of my father's sense of humor, and then I guess I distilled story into a character.
Yes.
Like I said, my youth and childhood was spent with a hunger for stories. When I took on my name, Joel Ben Izzy was my grandfather who it's not like he told me stories. I met him 3 times in my life, and I remember only one meeting with him. Because he died by the time I was 7, and I probably saw him when I was 2 and 3 and 5. I remember sitting with him in Cleveland trying to teach him to count. He was a successful businessman. He ran the Ideal Bedding Company, mattress store. but I was really trying to teach him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he said 1, 3, 2, 5, 4. Yeah? I said, no. That's all I remember of him. But when I wanted a storytelling name, I took on the name Joel, son of Izzy. Ben in Hebrew is son of, and Izzy is is a fun name. Isidore Shapiro. And he was evidently quite a storyteller, but it was the hunger of stories. So I took this hunger for stories and desire for stories, and I think I compressed that to make Lenny this storytelling trickster character and travel into that world.
Yeah, there's a little bit of Hunter Thompson in there as well. Like this.
Yeah.
And not Jack Kerouac, but Raymond Chandler.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the alcoholic side of it.
Yeah.
And it was for me it was a fascinating character, and I was like, it would be so cool if Lenny was real.
Yeah. And you had written, you said, I want to know more about your mentor, Lenny. I thought, oh crap, I'm going to have to level with Simon here.
But that's really good, though. I mean, there's a skill set to that, to be able to take all those different characters and make a brand new character and make it so real. Right. I mean, that's the strength of that, because you do think that this person is real, because Lenny has all of the hubris that a human being would have, the frail one that has had a lot of life experience and that can share that with you, but also that dark side of, like, he's had a little bit too much experience, and and there's a little bit of regret in there. Or that's how it was for me when I was reading the book.
No, that's exactly it. He's bitter, and this idea of, like, you're thinking, oh, if only he really was a true character. But think about how when someone comes to you in a story, and you tell, you're telling a story of I don't know, Gilgamesh or one of the stories you tell in your book, and the kids say, "Oh, is that a true story?" You don't.
Yes, it's true in my heart and my mind as it is in yours.
Yes, that's right. I mean, storytellers, we because we don't want to say no, it's a lie.
Right.
That's it. And I become, after hanging out with Martin just for a little bit, I become very almost rabid when somebody calls something a myth, like to mean a lie. Like, that's a myth, meaning that's a lie. No, there's something truer than true about those things.
Yeah, even things like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
That's true.
That's right. There's so much truth in those stories.
Yeah.
There's
and oddly in my book, because it's a memoir, and memoirs get into trouble when they say things are true that aren't strictly true. I actually do sort of a disclaimer by saying,
at the beginning,
this is a true story, but I better explain what I mean by true. I use the word true as we storytellers do, the way my old teacher Lenny did when he told some story about a 67 Mustang, a golden retriever he'd once had. And I said, "Is that a true story?" And he said, "What the hell do you mean by true? You want to know if it happened word for word like I said? It doesn't matter. There's all kinds of things that happen in life that just aren't true. The question is not whether a story is true, but whether it has truth in it. Truth with a capital T."
Yeah.
So I had Lenny do a disclaimer, which kind of accounts for Lenny.
Yeah. It's brilliant story, and also I got to mention, it's not just a biography; it's peppered with folk tales as well, that preface or conclude certain sections, which I think is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, there was only as I looked by it, these were the stories that helped me get through. And oddly, those were easy to write. The Beggar King, which frames it, that story of King Solomon, beginning and end, and the chapter opening stories, those just came naturally. The rest of the book was a pain in the ass to write. I don't know. This writing business is like really difficult, and it would be, because I wrote it. I began writing it in the time as my voice came back. But it took 5 years of writing and rewriting to really find the right voice for the book.
Right. And I imagine that your lens of the sickness and the process also changed and refocused as time progressed as well, I imagine.
Yeah, the perspective is always the challenge. I was telling stories about Nasruddin recently, or Nasruddin, or Nasruddin Hoja, Joha, Nasr. I mean, he's known by more names, but and I was explaining to this group that if you were to go to Turkey, you'd see a statue of Nasruddin, or the Hoja, Joha, and he would be seated atop a donkey, and it's him because the donkey's facing forward and he's looking backwards. And I said, with Nasruddin, you never quite know where the wisdom ends and the foolishness begins, because this could be a beautiful, brilliant answer to one of life's great mysteries, which is life must be lived going forward, but can only be understood looking backwards.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's that, or maybe it's just a way of saying Nasruddin is such an idiot, everything he does is ass backwards. Both are true.
But it's also truth, right? I mean, there's that one wonderful story where he's sitting underneath a tree and there are these two travelers. The first traveler comes up from the east and he says, "What's the town like that I'm heading towards?" And he says, "Well, what was the town like that you just came from?" And he says, "Oh, it's terrible. People were so rude there." And he says, "Yeah, the next town's terrible as well. They're all the same." And another guy comes from the east on the same road and he asks the Hodja the same question. The Hodja says, "Well, what was the last town you were in?" Like, "Oh, the people were wonderful." He's like, "Yeah, the next town, the people are going to be wonderful too." Right? And it's like, is he lying or is he bringing your truth to it with a capital T? Right? Is he saying that it's your point of view? It's like what you bring to that town, right? It's what you brought to that last town, right? And it's like those are the truths that I like in folk and fairy tales.
That's what's so rich. And just because it's Nasruddin, it's bad luck not to do at least 3 of them. I think
you've done 2, right?
Yeah. So here's another one. And this one came. I just learned this recently. I love it, and I have to give it away. This was I was with Liz Weir. Liz. I was doing a workshop at her barn up in Ballymena, up in the Northern Ireland, and this woman showed up, a storyteller, a Turkish storyteller from Dublin, but she's from Turkey and lives in Dublin now, and she had a copy of my book in Turkish for me to sign, which was really sweet, because in all these languages now, and I can't even find my name on the cover in some of them. But
that's so cool.
She said, "I have to give you a Nasruddin story." I said, "All right." Sanim, I think, was her name, and I said, she said, Nasruddin loved his donkey more than most anything, and yet one day he looked out and the donkey was just gone, no sign of it. He ran around the town in a panic looking. There's got to be somewhere there's donkey. No, he asked everybody, no sign of his donkey. And in an abject panic, he ran around not knowing what to do. And he finally came with a plan. He would make up a big sign. So he went to the center of town, made a big piece of paper, and he drew a picture of his donkey on the piece of paper. And on the top he wrote, "Missing donkey, reward," big letters. He thought for a moment. And he said, "Missing donkey, reward. Whoever finds my donkey can keep it." And people said, "Nasruddin, that's crazy. That's your reward. You're giving your donkey away. You love your donkey more than life itself." He says, "That's true. But in life, I've learned 2 things. 1, we must find what we love. And 2, we must be ready to give it away." So please share that story.
I will. I love that story. That's such a good story. One of the things that I've told my kids over the years, learned from personal experience, is if there's something that you have that you don't want to lose, don't lend it to anybody. But if it's something that you love, give it away, because you can always get another whatever it is back, right?
Mm-hmm.
I used to do that. There are certain books that I used to have that I absolutely loved, and I would buy like 3 or 4 copies of them. This is before I realized that books aren't cheap. And I'd leave them on trains or in cafes, I'll have a little note in here and say, pass this on to somebody that you think might like it, and let's make a list of the, here's my name, put your name underneath it, and then hand it on to someone else. Yeah, I don't know where those books are. And then when I went to, I was talking to someone that worked in an airport, and they said that they have rooms filled with books that people have left. So I never leave a book in an airport because they just sweep them away.
Wow. I had no idea, but of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have, and all sorts of other lost property too. And it's like, well, why don't they give them away to, refugees who are coming into the country or whatever, or like, underserved communities of any sort, But apparently airports are huge depositories of used books. Who knew?
Who knew? But it goes to sort of, I mean, anything ties back to storytelling one way or another, but it goes to sort of one of the reasons we tell stories is to make something precious and meaningful. That you picture some, I think of Dallas Fort Worth Airport and the vast number of books they have that they're sitting around there, but with the right framing and the right story, then something becomes truly meaningful. I'm teaching a class now through a group called Stage Bridge, which is a senior performing arts center. Senior being like over 50. That's a new senior, and
that's me.
and this is it's called Stories Sparked by Our Possessions. And I'll be teaching it this afternoon. The focus is on stories, because today's the Ides of March when we're talking. Tomorrow is Purim, the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is where my story began when I woke up on Purim with gout, which led to the finding of my the thyroid cancer. And then the next day is St. Patrick's Day. So the focus is on luck and lucky objects and unlucky objects, but it's the stories associated with things. And this to me is one of the great gifts we offer as a storyteller, is in a world with way, way too much stuff. And too many activities and too much news and too much information, so that we're just overwhelmed. Storytelling kind of carves out a space for you to look and say, look at this. And it's so funny because it's almost the exact opposite of what storytelling used to be, or what I thought of it as. My object, my sort of ideal, having a childhood, where we would sort of try to cut through the smog and try to fry an egg on the sidewalk, but you couldn't because by the time we opened it was already hard boiled. It was that hot. Blah 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 blah. My notion of storytelling was more like a circus coming to town. Like, everything's pretty much same old in this little town somewhere, but one day the circus comes to town, and isn't that magical? And that was my first. I mean, I told you when I started storytelling, but really, as a kid, I was doing puppetry. At age 4 or 5, and the idea of bringing these creatures to life. And then I eventually started a career as a magician, and worked my way through high school and into college, doing magic shows.
So you were paying for college with magic shows?
I paid for some of it, but you can't pay for Stanford with magic shows. No, Stanford was very generous and well endowed, and gave me. My family had no money for college at all, especially after my brothers used whatever there was left in the bank account. That was gone. My parents said, "Here's $100. That's your college education. Good luck." And
wow.
But Stanford was really very generous in supporting me, even after I dropped out and then decided to come back and study storytelling. But magic was always a kind of an extra side gig for me, and a way to earn money for my family. Like when I was in high school, I could earn money for my family because we didn't have. My parents were on. My father was usually sick or on welfare or disability, and it was money was short.
Wow. Do you still do magic?
I do a little bit. After Dreidels on the Brain, which is very much about doing magic over the 8 nights of Hanukkah and then looking for a miracle. And the time when my father was sick and in the hospital, it said over 8 days of Hanukkah 1971. And we're working on a musical based on the book, which is really kind of fun because it was such a fun, wild era. I started to get out and do some things. This is going to be a big hit here.
So Joel is making a... Hang on, let me make you full screen so I can actually see what you're doing.
At this particular point in the podcast, Joel, Ben, Izzy decided to take a pencil, a long straight pencil, and rub it up and down, and then wobble it in his loose fingers. This presented the optical illusion of the pencil bending. As Joel said, this is really good stuff for a podcast.
The screen's exactly the opposite. Or even taking a pen like this and rubbing it. I wonder if that really works.
It does.
Yeah, it does a little bit. Yeah. So I haven't done magic as much recently. You know, what happened was over time doing magic, I became, I guess you'd have to say, disillusioned. Which is it felt like it was mostly about tricks and props and me knowing a secret that you don't know. So there was that inherent distance, like, oh, I'm smarter than you, or I'm the magician. And it began to feel false. And when I started telling stories, I thought, this is in a way very transparent, and you're giving something to somebody that can elevate them.
Yeah. I've seen some very good magicians over the years. I think probably because I go to a lot of showcases. But there was a guy when we used to live up in Orford, New Hampshire. We used to go up to Bradford, Vermont, and there was a restaurant there, and they would have Marco the magician who would come in and would do these. I don't know if they still do, but he would come in and do table magic. And there was a trick that he did for us once, and we were just like blown away by it, because it was like, basically, give me a wedding ring and I'm going to do this trick. And he, 1 minute it's in this dollar bill and then it's gone. And then he pulls out his keychain wallet. It's a wallet you open up, and there's like keys on little hooky things, and on one of the little hooky things is the wedding ring, right? And it was just like, what? How on earth can you do that? And the next time we went, he did it. We asked him to do that trick because it was just so mind blowing, And it's, for me, that there was an excitement there, that he was giving us this thrill of the unknown. And I don't know, maybe because I just love magic with a CK and the magic stories, right? That whole mystical place of the mysticism, if you will, of life, right? And I think that type of stuff plays into that. So I have this massive appreciation for it. But I totally hear what you say, and I really believe that what you're saying is true about folk and fairy stories, is that they give something to people and they elevate them, and it because you can see those people in the audience who are just sitting there because they have to be, right? Because either their husband or their wife has dragged them, or their parents have dragged them, right? And they don't want to be there, and they're sitting there. But then you hit a story which resonates with them, and you can see the corners of their mouth starting to turn up, and they're like, no, I'm not going to, no. And then they start to smile a little bit more, and all of a sudden they're leaning into you, and you've got them then, or the story's got them, right?
It's such. I mean, this is kind of the great joy of being a storyteller, is what we're staring at is people's faces. Yeah. And they say conductors live a long time, because they're conducting and just the music and the heart, and that's a reason. But there's something so delicious about seeing a story appear on someone's face. Yeah. And I've done a lot of story consulting in my time. I mean, so okay. I have never had a job. So I was going to ask you for one time, because I could really use. I've never had a job, but
we're all going to start in business together, right? The irony.
Yeah, I think I need something with a paycheck. Have you heard of this thing, a paycheck? It's like the idea that
I'm
a
a
certain amount
storyteller.
of
I'm a
money.
performing artist.
Yeah. So, and to live in Berkeley is not cheap, and we have a big old house, and it just goes on and on and on. But what I did, and it's really been it's been 30 years now, is I was invited to sit on a jury. It was a mock trial training jury, and I watched these lawyers who were practicing their skills. And I realized that they were terrible. They were snide. Oh, so you asked the shipment be done in the usual way, huh? They were snide, and one guy came up to like build rapport with me, and to talk to the jury. Hey, nice tie, which was weird because I wasn't wearing a tie, so it felt like a total miss.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this to my brother-in-law, who was a lawyer at the time at one of these big fancy LA law firms. This was the firm of somebody, and somebody else, in Southern California. And this is the glory days of law firms when they were as rich as tech is now. And
was it something like Dewey?
Cheatham and Howe?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. This was somebody, and somebody else. And so I mentioned this to him, and a couple months later, he called and said, we are having a retreat in Santa Barbara for our law firm, and we're going to have a workshop on yoga for lawyers, but the yoga instructor threw his back out. So maybe you want to do storytelling for lawyers.
That's the irony again.
Yeah, there we go. So wholesale irony. Brooks and Ben Izzy. Shall we do it? So we do Simon and Joel. No, Simon sells. So I went to do it, and I told that story you heard of the coin in King Solomon, and afterwards a fellow came up to introduce himself to me, and this was the firm somebody, and somebody else. This was the somebody else, and I looked at him and I said, "Whoa, you're alive?" Because I thought if your name was at the top of a law firm, you've been dead for 150 years. He said, "I'm alive now, but I'm not sure about next week." I said, "What happens next week?" He says, "Well, I got a case going to trial, and what it involves is me conveying the contents of about 16 feet worth of depositions to 12 people who couldn't figure out how to get out of jury duty."
Oh.
And there was a lot I could have said about that, but what I said was, "You measure depositions in feet?" He said, "Yeah. And in fact, they're 4 to a page, so 16 feet is actually 64 feet.
Wow.
I said, "Wow, that's a lot." He said, "Yeah, and the thing is, I don't quite know what this case is about. I don't understand it either, and I can't explain it to them until I understand it." And I said, "You haven't got much money riding on this, have you?" He said, "Well, our clients do, like 50 million. And at the time, 50 million was a lot of money, right? So it's still a lot of money to me. So he said, "Look, why don't you come back to my office in Los Angeles? You can help me sort of think about this as a story, and maybe even at the end, in closing, if I could borrow your King Solomon and the coins story." So we went back to him and back to his office, which had sure enough, all these depositions stacked against the wall. And I said, "So, what's the story?" He said, "Well, the plaintiff alleges that on March 3rd, 1982, 3-hour information dump." And I said, "Wow, that's not a story. That's a lot of information." I said, "But there was something funny in that story. This was about a merger that was supposed to happen that didn't happen. They had code names. Yeah, there was the wolf was one was the bear." I said, "That's kind of interesting." He said, "Yeah, I never thought about it. It was like the big bad wolf. Who's knocking at the door?" He began to play with this. And I said, "Tell me about your client and how they began and what they wanted." And, as I listened to it, I thought, well, this is one of those gray areas. It's not like I'm supporting some bad guys here. This is a kind of a gray area between giant companies. And after talking to him, I said, "Is it like this, and this?" He said, "No, but it's kind of like this, and this." And it began to shape into a story. And you could see the excitement on his face. He said, "Oh, I want to tell this to the jury because what I want to explain is this part." And suddenly he had the framework to fit into this. And he was excited about his story, which we shaped up into his opening. And then he won his case. He saved his client $50 million. And I was getting called by all sorts of lawyers who wanted to win their cases too, which is what lawyers want to do, which was great.
Because were they paying you, I hope?
I was charging them what they charged their clients, because otherwise they wouldn't respect it, and I could use the money. And the good news was I was getting a lot of work from lawyers. The bad news was I was working with a lot of lawyers.
Totally get that.
So, but eventually this led to other kinds of story consulting, and some of it's been actually really wonderful. Some of it's been great.
So there's a question that I often ask people on this show is like, what's the most unusual job? And that sounds like, or unexpected, at least. Mm-hmm. That sounds quite an unexpected thing to be consulting for lawyers as a storyteller.
That was unexpected, yeah. I mean, consulting for lawyers, speakers, organizations. I mean, I'm thinking of places I've performed. I was once hired in an elevator at Macy's to tell stories between the 1st and the 7th floor, up, down, as short stories, up and down, up and down.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Was it a very slow elevator?
Well, it got slower because I would sort of push pause, and they weren't very happy with it. But I ended up in all these places, and like an amphitheater in Italy, where I could speak in a normal volume, and the acoustics were such. This was like the Far East side. The acoustics were such that I could speak like this, and they could hear like 50 yards away. It was wonderful.
Yeah, the Hollywood Bowl's like that, isn't it?
It's, I've never been on the stage, and I know that they have all these. I mean, I've never told any to perform there, but they have these large structures that echo and correct the sound.
Yeah, when Sarah and I, we drove, she's from the East Coast, and we went out to Portland. Like I said, when we drove cross country, we ended up going to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I wanted to do was go to the Hollywood Bowl because the Beatles had played on it, right? And
yeah.
Like anywhere that John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Ringo and George had been, if I was going to stand on that stage, that was going to be it. And Sarah was out on like the back of the audience place, and I don't know if I was allowed to be on there, but I climbed up on there anyway, and I was just talking in my normal voice. And I was like, "Can you hear me?" And she's like, "Yes." And I was like, "Imagine playing with 60-watt speakers, right? Which at the time were probably like the biggest speakers you could get, mm-hmm. with this whole place filled with screaming people." And it's like, do you think you'd be able to hear it? And it's like, absolutely not.
Oh, I remember in high school. Like I'd asked a girl out on a date. Her name was Lisa McPherson, very sweet. And I had a date and almost no money. And I asked Mr. Zegers, who was the cool young teacher, I said, "What do I do? I have like not much money." He said, "How much you got?" I said, "I have like $15. He said, "Okay, here's what you do. Can you get your parents' car?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You go to the Hollywood Bowl." I said, "I can afford the Hollywood Bowl." He said, "No, they have student tickets that are going to be $3 each. And then what you do is you go to the store and you buy some bread, some cheese, and some chicken, and then a bottle of wine. Don't tell them I told you to buy a bottle of wine. Use a fake ID. And then you go to the Hollywood Bowl, and that's going to cost you like $10 or $11 for the food. Maybe like $8 you can get that. Then you go to the Hollywood Bowl, but you get there like an hour and a half early, and they'll sell you the best seats. And you sit there in the Hollywood Bowl. As the stars come out, you have your bread and your cheese and your chicken and your wine, and you sit there, and she'll be so impressed. It'll cost you $15 total. I said, "That's great." And so I go there, and sure enough, exactly as predicted, I'm sitting there. Tickets are $3 each. Best seats available, like right in the center. The stars are coming out. Empty, except for right in front of me is I see another couple seated, and I look over their shoulder, and there's like bread and cheese and wine. And I look and I say, "Mr. Zegers?" He said, "Yeah, I was describing this to you, and it sounded like such a good idea. I had to do it myself."
I love that. That's so cool. Yeah, we did. We were just passing through. We didn't get to eat anything or spend the rest of the day there. But it was amazing being on that. I love that stuff. That's so cool.
Yeah.
What a romantic time.
Yeah,
what a romantic time.
It
So
was
what I want to ask you something a little bit about your process when you come to learning a story.
You've had a chance to interview all these storytellers. I would love to interview you for your podcast, because now I got to hear the story of the parrot and the merchant.
Oh, I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to do it for you.
Yeah, but seriously, I would be happy to interview you and turn the mic around the other way. You'd have to record it because you got the setup there. But then you could be interviewed on you. Have any of the storytellers interviewed you yet?
Somebody tried to do it once, and it wasn't very good. So I don't find myself that interesting. So they were asking questions, and I was like, "Yeah, well, what about you?" Like we kind of turned it back around.
That's the old storytellers thing. I don't find myself that interesting.
That's why I tell folk and fairy tales and not personal narrative. It's like, I don't want to share that stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember doing a workshop at a school in San Francisco years ago, and I don't know. I think I'd copied off some of Aesop's fables when teaching people to move around like this and bring these stories to life. I mean, that kind of workshop and getting the teachers involved so they tell stories to their students. And afterwards, a young African-American teacher came to me and said, "Wow, this is great, but I just couldn't tell stories like you do. I just don't have stories. They're not interesting." I said, "Nothing?" And she said, "Well, no, not these kinds." She said, "But there were the stories that my grandmother told me about escaping on the Underground Railroad when she was a little girl. You think my class would find those stories interesting?" And I said, "Yeah." So the idea that this is something I confront all the time, is that people, and in my experience, in the right context, in the right setting, everybody becomes a great storyteller, and people's stories are really very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think this might be some of what you were talking with Jay about, that sort of that English notion of, and I have run into this in Ireland too, where I've done workshops and helped people find their own stories, but then they tell these marvelous, beautiful stories from the Troubles and other things. They said, but nobody would pay me to tell these. I would never do that. But it's something strangely, and us Americans go to the other extreme where we say, "Oh, this horrible thing happened. Let me tell you about it, about this pus-filled situation." And I hear these stories thinking, "Oh God, if this goes on 50 minutes, you're going to get a bill from me." Because this is not story. I mean, I love personal stories, but we're in an era of so many of them flying at you, and really, to be treated as a therapist without the tools is just harsh.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. So, Joel,
yes,
what's your process when you find a story that you want to? How do you find a story?
It's a good question. You've traveled a lot around this country. There are road signs, and some say "slow children at play."
Yeah.
And whenever we would drive past those, my mother would always say, "Can't those children play any faster?" And then there's the other sign that says "soft shoulder."
Yeah.
And I asked my dad when I was a kid, I said, "Well, what's that mean?" Anyways, he said that the California Highway Department puts that up. It's great. They realize people have too much tension in their shoulders, and they should soften their shoulders. So that soft shoulder is important because it's sort of trying to feel a story tapping me on the shoulder. And what I found is that my process is, I heard you interview Jay, who works so devoted and studiously to develop this, and I so admire that. Mine is to sort of keep polishing it through telling. So maybe I'll tell about a story. It'll work its way into another story. It'll be a little reference point to a piece that sort of grows, and it's just shaping. I somehow can't really do it alone very well, and I need to work with an audience on it. And so it's an odd thing. I sometimes wish I could. Writing I can do alone, and rewriting for a book, but it's such a different skill. So it's really trying to get that story to take root and plant it and then let it grow, and over time it just seems to take on a life of its own. That said, I'm at a strange point in storytelling, which has always felt like a path for me, and I don't quite see where the next space is. It's kind of having faith that that path will appear. Yeah. I've written a couple books. I'm working on another couple different book projects. I'm working on a musical, but the path of story, I'm trying to understand where it goes. And this past week, I've been doing a lot of work on mindfulness and meditation at this retreat I went to in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And there's something about the stories that heal us, that bring us into the present moment, and that let us pay attention. That seems like it's a very important work to do, especially in a world that feels so chaotic and sometimes random and frenetic. The stories that focus us on what's really important: compassion, paying attention, kindness. So that's not a very clear answer. I guess the straight on. I said I'd be honest. You asked what my process is. I don't know.
I know it sounded like a process to me. I mean, it sounds like you have a story that taps on your shoulder, and so when you're at a gig, you might say, "I just found this new story, and it's about this," and then the next time you might do the same thing, but you'll embellish it a little bit more, and then the next time you start to tell the story, and it grows from there. That's what I heard anyway.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a process that I guess there are some stories that I've told or have ended up telling that have started like that, but that's not how I generally work. It's not how a lot of other storytellers. But then Bobby Norfolk, for example, mm-hmm. he doesn't tell his stories out loud. He works on them in his head quietly. He doesn't even tell them to Sherry, right? He's just working on the stories in his head, and Sherry will say, "Do you want to, say them out loud?" And he's like, "No," until he gets up on the stage, and then out it comes. It's like, oh my god!
Yeah, that's in the head of Zeus stuff that I can't do. But I'll just give you an example. I went a while back to my cousin's wedding, and I went with a particular question. My cousin in Denver married somebody who'd converted to Judaism, so it was like full-on Hasidic. She was the lesbian, feminist, politically leftist woman. She married the Hasidic guy who'd converted to Judaism, and this was a wedding like straight out of Helm. People dressed in black hats, fur of 18th century Russia, and the dividing line between the... And the rabbi had a long beard like this down to his waist and like this, and he blessed them, and he did the sign of the Kohanim, which is the Spock sign, right? Anyway, this is the blessing. Leonard Nimoy got this because as a child he looked up in temple and he saw the rabbi's blessing with this sign. This the fingers parted like this.
Okay.
And a statue in Boston, I understand, of Leonard Nimoy's hand, a tribute to him. So I'd always been curious because he blessed him with the Spock Vulcan sign, which he did. And I'd been curious because another rabbi had told me that he'd said, the ability to do this blessing, this Spock blessing, this is genetic. I said, really? He said, yeah, because there's different groups with Judaism. There's the Kohanim. Anybody named Cohen? I mentioned Leonard Cohen before. He would be a descendant of the Kohanim, the priestly class. People who are from that priestly class have an easier time doing this, but people who are from the Levites or Israel, the sort of lower classes, which is me, they have a harder time doing this. And when I heard this, I didn't know if this rabbi was bullshitting me or if there was some truth to it. He said, yeah, it's called the Kohen gene. So I was in Denver. I saw the Hasidic rabbi who looked like a Helm character with his coat and his beard, and I saw him bless the couple, and I was riding with him to the other location for the reception. I said, Rabbi, you can answer a question that's been bugging me, huh? There's this thing you do, like Leonard Nimoy did. Yes, the sign of the Kohanim, the blessing. I bless the couple; they should live and be well. Jean and Al should enjoy. They have many children. Blah 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 blah. I said, yes. Is that genetic? Because another rabbi told me it was genetic. And he said, absolutely not. Now, this is strange because you ask a rabbi a question, you do not expect a straight answer. You say, well, maybe this, maybe that. But the Talmud actually says this. But Rabbi Gimliel had a good point. So I said, what do you mean absolutely not? Absolutely not. The ability to do this is not genetic. I said, how can you be so sure? I'll tell you. He said, you saw I blessed Arthur and Jean, the young couple. They should live and be well for many years. Yeah. I'll abide to 120 plus 3 months. Yes. He said, I do it, no problem. But, and there's always a but if it's a Jewish, but, he said, I happen to have a twin brother who's also a rabbi. He does all the things I do, all the blessings. But when it comes time to do the blessing of the Kohanim, he cannot do it to save his life. And he's developed a technique with his tallis string, the prayer shawl. He wraps the strings from his tallis around his fingers and he pulls them. It's like a marionette. That's how I know. So, where's that story going? I don't know. That was just one of those things that came up there. But is it a process? I guess so. Maybe I don't understand my process as a way. Maybe it has a little bit of magic with a C and magic with a CK.
Yeah. There you go. I don't want to spoil it for you, so let's not say it's a process.
All right.
Well, Joel, I really appreciate you spending all this time with me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Obviously, people won't know that we had probably 15 minutes at the beginning just chatting and having a grand old time. It's like we're long-lost brothers that have just met for the first time.
We would say our mothers were brothers, is the old saying.
Oh, is that mothers were brothers? From hell, right?
Right.
It's been an absolute joy chatting with you, and we'll have to do this again sometime in some
form
or another.
Thank you so much for having me here on your podcast, and thank you again for your podcast. I've been loving. I do the same walk through my neighborhood each day through the hills, and I've been listening to your podcasts and conversation. Thanks to all the other storytellers who've been sharing their stories and their processes with you. It's just such a great thing you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's a good idea to give a shout out to all my previous guests as well. Absolutely. Everyone has been very generous with their time. Well, thanks very much.
That's the trademark of storytellers, generosity. Like Nasruddin, find what you love, then give it away. It's a tough way to make a living.
Yes.
And selling irony still sounds like a pretty good business to me.
I think it is.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and stay well.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Neither of us wanted to end the conversation, as you can probably hear as we stumble our goodbyes. So many stories, so many asides, so much life and joy. Thanks, Joel. I can't wait to be in person with you. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to check out other episodes. And if you think I should interview a certain folk and fairy tale, myths and legends storyteller, one of our elders, then please send me an email. You can find me and my work on Facebook and on my website at Simon Brooks Storyteller, and on Instagram, Simon M. Brooks. Diamond Scree? Yep, that's me, the English fella and storyteller. A shout out to Chris Jedd for creating and recording and letting me use the wonderful music for my podcast. His band is called Blackpool Mecca. Check them out. They're really good. You can help keep this podcast alive and support my craft by becoming one of my patrons and paying anything from $1 an episode that you enjoy to a regular monthly subscription. In return, you get extras, early release, and exclusive content on my work. www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. If you can't join my wonderful tribe of patrons, then help me out by doing something you can do. I would be very grateful if you could leave a review on Podbean, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, wherever you found this episode. It doesn't take long, and it helps not just me, but others find and enjoy this podcast. Thanks again for being here with me. I know that there are a lot of other places you could be, and I really appreciate it. Until next time, be healthy, be happy, and share the stories you love. Cheers.
It's just a story.